In this video, I'll cover everything you need to know to come up with an app idea, build it with AI, and market it to start making money on the internet. Now, why should you listen to me? I've just grown my app, copycoder.ai, to 10K in monthly recurring revenue in about 2 months. But if I'm being honest, it didn't really take me 2 months. It took me actually around 2 years to learn all of the lessons that I needed to learn to get to this point. And I'll be trying to compress all of that in this video for you. In the past, I used to just focus on building products and not so much on marketing it. But this is actually the most important part, and I had to figure this out in order to build a successful app. So if you want to build an app that can make you a nice side income or even scale it to 30, 40, 100K MRR, then you're at the right place. The cool thing is we're in 2025 and you really don't need any programming experience anymore. You can build most of the things with AI. So there's really no more excuse. Let's get into it. Step 1 is to come up with an app idea. There are several ways to do this, but here are my 3 favorite ones. Copying something that's already working, solving your own problems, and doing research on social media. And this ranking kind of goes from easiest to hardest and also most validated to most unvalidated. Let's start with the first, copying something that's already working. I'm going to be very honest with you. For most people, especially when you're starting out, this is actually the best approach. Most people think that if you build an app, you need to have a totally unique and original idea, and you cannot have any competitors. And I think that's actually a big mistake, because here's how I think about it. If you think about the entire existing space of marketplaces, within that, there are validated problems and there are unvalidated problems. If a problem is validated, it's actually very likely that businesses already exist that are providing a solution to this problem, and that there are customers that are already paying to solve that problem. Actually, the fact that these businesses exist proves that this problem is validated. And then there are a bunch of problems that maybe exist, but they're not really validated yet. So as a total newbie, is it easier to just go with a problem that is already validated, or actually try and find a totally unvalidated problem and building a solution for that? Well, I'd argue that it's a much safer bet to just pick the validated problem and build a solution for that, because you'll be surprised at how big markets usually are and how unsaturated they are. It's usually never the case that markets are so crowded and so saturated that there's really no space in it anymore, and that it becomes hard to get customers within that market. A good way to think about it is if you wanted to start a restaurant in your local town. Is it a good idea to start an Italian restaurant, or is it actually a better idea to start a restaurant with a totally new and unique cuisine? Well, if you start an Italian restaurant, you'll know that people already like Italian food, and your job is just to make food that doesn't suck. Whereas if you start a restaurant with a totally new and unique cuisine that people have never heard of, it's a much bigger gamble, and yes, it can be a big success, but it can also be a total failure. The second approach is to solve your own problems. A lot of people recommend this because there are actually several benefits to it. If you encounter a problem yourself, you are the expert of it. You are actually the user of it, and therefore you have a much better perspective in building a solution for this. Also, because of the scale of the internet, if you have a problem and you're absolutely sure that you have this problem, then just because of the scale of the internet, it becomes very likely that you will find other people who have the exact same problem. The only big downside to this approach that you have to be really careful of is your own biases. You have to make sure that the problem you're trying to solve is actually a real problem. And sometimes this gets kind of distorted in your mind because of this mindset of trying to find a problem that you can solve to make money. This mindset can easily turn any kind of little problem that you have into something where you think, oh, this is actually a good idea and I can make money with this. So ideally, when you're using this approach to come up with ideas, be really honest with yourself and ask yourself, if this solution would exist, would you actually pay money for the solution? Usually the more painful a problem is, the more money you'll be able to charge for this. And finally, the third method is doing research on social media. I personally think this method is a bit harder than the other two, but if you do find something, it can actually be a really big hit. And if you think about it, social media is basically just a place for a bunch of people to talk. And when people talk, they talk about their problems. So all you actually have to do is just listen. A great platform to do this is Twitter and also Reddit, because people have a lot of conversation there. And usually when you go into the replies, into the comments, that's where the real conversation happens. So make sure to dig into that. And that's usually where you can find the real problems and find like the little gems of problems that people are talking about. Another thing I really like to do, and this is actually the method that we use to come up with Copycoder, is to just be really hyper aware whenever you see viral content, whether it's a video or a tweet or whatever. Because whenever something went viral, there's usually a deeper reason for it, and an entire business can be built on this viral concept. So for Copycoder, for example, at some point we realized that this concept of turning a screenshot into code is actually a inherently viral concept, and that it makes a lot of sense to build a business around this. Step 2 is how to build your application with AI. A lot of people watching this may not have any programming experience, and that's totally fine because we're in 2025. The cool thing nowadays is you really don't need to have years of programming experience. You can let AI do most of the heavy lifting for you, and the rest you can just learn by asking AI. So the building part itself will get easier and easier over time, and the actual hard part is coming up with the ideas and the marketing part. So I think you really don't have to overcomplicate this, and I'm going to be trying to make it as easy as possible for you. So here's the tech stack that I would use if you were building a web application if you're starting out. Cursor as your AI code editor, Next.js as your web app framework, Supabase as your backend and auth provider, Vercel to deploy your app, and Stripe to accept payments. These are all very popular tools and frameworks. And so the important thing is just to get started right now, and you can still optimize your tech stack later. Let's start with your development environment, for which I recommend Cursor. For those that don't know, Cursor is a so-called IDE, and it has some really cool AI features integrated within it. Now, why do I suggest Cursor over some of the other AI tools like Bolt, Lovable, or Replit? The other tools might be a bit more beginner friendly, but I think Cursor gets really more efficient to use once your app gets a bit more complex. Once you have to deal with things like integration and fine-tuning your code, it gets really much easier to use something like Cursor, which is more flexible. Probably a close second tier is also Windsurf, which is also really good. If you haven't used Cursor yet, you can check out some of my tutorials that I've done on this channel or on my TikTok channel. In terms of the framework, I would go with the Next.js and ShadCN combo. For those that don't know what it is, you can think of it kind of like a template. Next.js is like the skeleton of your app, and ShadCN are like little UI components that you can use so that you don't have to rewrite everything from scratch. And currently Next.js and ShadCN is probably the most popular tech stack for building web applications. If you go onto the Next.js website, you can also find a bunch of templates that you can use to get started much faster. Or of course, you can use my tool CopyCoder, which lets you paste a screenshot of something that you like, and then you can kind of recreate that really quickly, which is kind of like a custom template. Okay, let's move on to the backend. To make your app really production ready, you'll need a backend, and I think that Supabase is a really good solution for that. It's really popular right now, it's really easy to use, and it also has a very big community around it. You can usually integrate it pretty quickly into your code, and you can also ask AI for all of the steps how to do that. The cool thing about Supabase is that it also comes with user authentication, which you will very likely also need for your app. And it will provide you with all kinds of different options how you can let users sign in, for example, with Google or something else. Finally, you're going to want a way for customers to pay you. And the most straightforward approach here is to just go with Stripe. You could also use other tools like Lemon Squeezy or Paddle. These are so-called merchant of records, and that's the benefit that you don't have to deal with taxes. But at the same time, the transaction fees are much higher, so you might as well just deal with the taxes later. And since we're on the topic, I would really recommend that when you're starting out to not have a free plan for your app and only have a paid plan. I know it's kind of become the default for all apps to have a free plan or like a freemium version, but I really don't think it's a very good approach, especially for solo developers to start out. The problem with a free version is that you're going to get a bunch of freebie people, and if they use it, you don't know if your product is really validated or not. You only really know that when people actually pay for it. So it's better to just get paying customers in the beginning. And if your goal later is to scale, that's where it makes sense to introduce free plans, because the goal of a free plan is basically just to scale faster. Okay, and finally we get to the juicy and most important part in my opinion, which is how do you market your app and how do you get your first paying customers? And this is also the part that most people skip. They think that if you build a good product, people will just somehow magically come to use your product. But doing this part well is going to decide whether your app is going to be successful or not. I would also recommend that you go with a marketing first approach rather than a building first approach, and you will likely be more successful. Okay, so there are essentially 4 different categories of marketing. This framework was, I believe, created by Alex Hormozi. You'll see in the square on the left, there's one-to-one marketing and one-to-many marketing. And on the top, there's warm and cold prospects, which just means cold prospects have never heard of you and warm prospects have heard of you a couple times already. So in the first box, you'll find warm outreach, which is basically telling your friends or people that you already know about your app and reaching out to them one-on-one. In the second square, there's cold outreach, which is basically reaching out to people that you don't know and sending them an email that have never heard of your app. Then in the third square, there's creating content, which is how you reach people that are being warmed up to you. And in the last square, there's running ads, which is basically reaching a bunch of people that have never heard of you. Now for marketing your app, let's scratch the entire one-to-one category because we actually want to do something that scales. And then in the one-to-many category, let's scratch the ads for now, because ads are really something that, unless you have a lot of experience in it already, is rather something that you should do later on when you have a working product and you also have some money to invest. So we will be focusing on the one-to-many marketing for warm prospects, which is also called creating content. And there are many different things that you can do within that. And here's the order in which I think you should do them. Step 1 is to go into communities and start commenting there. In the beginning, you're going to have to do a bit of the unscalable things in order to get some traction. And the best way to do that is to find the communities where your target audience is hanging out. So if you're building something in the health space, for example, find a subreddit that is in that space and just join the conversation and try to be a member of it. And then sometimes you can subtly plug your app or talk about whatever it is you're building. If you're building something for expats in Japan, then maybe you need to find a YouTube channel that is addressing exactly this target audience, and then you need to go lurk in the comments of that YouTube channel. The key is just to get your first few customers. Step 2 is then to start building an audience and to create content that can go viral. And this is obviously the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I had to learn for 2 years to get really good at. And of course, you could say that Copycoder is successful because I already have built an audience. And yes, I think part of that is true, but nowadays actually the number of followers in a social media platform is not that relevant anymore. Most of the social platforms are going with a TikTok model where it's actually quite easy to just go viral from the beginning, so you don't have to have a large audience. And so the key to being good on social media is just more and more going to be knowing and understanding the concepts around it. And the best way to learn that is actually just to study what other people that are already successful are doing. So if you see a viral video, just try to really dissect it word by word and try to understand what they're doing in every step and just recreate that and put your own twist on it. Same thing with a tweet or a LinkedIn post. I would say currently TikTok is still the easiest to go viral straight from the beginning. The first video I ever posted on there got over 100,000 views, and the second video then got 800,000 views. So you can really go viral very quickly and you don't need to have a large audience. And I know people where it's been similar with Instagram Reels, where you kind of just really need to find the right format and the right structure, and then the video will just take off. On YouTube, it can still be a bit harder in the beginning to grow. Same with Twitter and also LinkedIn. One of the most interesting things I learned about creating content and why I think it's such a good method is because once you actually figure out how to create something that goes viral, a bunch of other content creators will just copy that and basically do free marketing for you. And their incentive is obviously to create content that will grow their channels, but at the same time, they're just doing free marketing for you. And step 3 is then building an affiliate network, which is kind of what I was talking about in the end. People doing free things for you. The only difference is that you actually give them an extra incentive, which is sharing profits, to make that free content for you. So once you actually figure out how to make something go viral, it will also be much easier to get people onto your affiliate program because they have double incentives. They will know that your content is really good for their own audience, and they will also make some money from it. And finally, as step 4, I put optimizing SEO here. And some of you might say, well, isn't SEO outdated? What's going to happen with AI? And yes, I think that's true, but at the same time, most of the AI now is still trained on the results of SEO, so whatever shows up high in SEO will very likely also show up high in LLMs, so these results are somewhat correlated. And also the situation right now is still that a lot of traffic is coming through Google, so whatever works now, I would just keep doing it now and not do it because it might not work in the future. But the good thing is if you do steps 1 to 3, then you will very naturally just get a good SEO score. So you're kind of doing SEO while you're doing that, because all SEO is just creating good content and making Google find that content. And then if you want to take it to a next level, you can do it a bit more professionally by analyzing keywords and trying to optimize the content that you create for the keywords and publishing blog posts and so on. Okay, this video turned out quite long. I really wanted to cover everything. I hope that you liked it, and let me know if you want me to take any parts of this video and go deeper on that specific part. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my guide on how to come up with an app idea, build it with AI, and market it so that you can start making money.